That's great. So Helen, do you want to say a few words or should I get started?
Oh, no, you should get started. Oh, Joyce, I want to thank you for doing this. I think this was such a wonderful idea. And I really think that Lee would have been thrilled to know that so many people cared for her and wanted to celebrate her birthday.
Aw, thank you so much. It's a pleasure, of course, and especially because at times, women have been overlooked for their contributions and their accomplishments, and at times are in the shadow of the husband during that era. So that being said, my name is Joyce Raimondo, and I am the education coordinator at the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center. And we're hosting this program to celebrate Lee Krasner. It's her 113th birthday today. She was born in 1908. And we have wonderful, wonderful guest speakers who are going to share informally about their firsthand remembrances of Lee. But before we get started, I'm going to present a short video of Lee speaking about her process and her work. And then I'm going to do a brief PowerPoint presentation just to highlight some of what I consider not just the dramatic story of Lee's life, but also her attitudes towards life and art, and of course, her work. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And I just love this video.
I think all painting is biographical. I think you can read any artist if you take the trouble to. The first approval comes in this form. This is so good, you would not know it was done by a woman. Yeah.
I once had that said to me. Yeah. It's the most peculiar feeling.
Yeah, I know. You put it beautifully. It's the most, you don't know quite what to do with the damn thing.
How does a painting incubate?
Heavy. What do you mean?
Trying to get into your head when you're standing there in front of that wall.
Mm. You just take a deep breath and hope for the best and get into it. And sometimes, as I say, it comes through miraculously.
Okay.
Anything can send me off to when it's time to get started. And then when the momentum gets going, the rapport starts, then I'm in a work stretch. I did a batch of drawings. I had them pinned up in the whole studio. I went in one day. I hated them. I tore them all up and threw them on the floor. Mm. When I went into the studio again, which was several days later, they looked pretty good that way. It seems to be a work process of mine. I'm constantly going back to something I did earlier, remaking it, doing something else with it, and coming forth with another, more clarified image, possibly. I don't know. I can tell when the thing is alive and going, and that, gets me all, my adrenaline going, and then I want to stay with it. I pretty much know by now. And when it's a dead duck, I know that too. Color for me is a very mysterious thing. I might say, I haven't done anything in blue, I'm going to use blue. But then it's like it comes out green or alizarin crimson or something. I'm aware of that. I'm conscious of that kind of thing, but I don't try to change it. I don't say it's got to be blue. And I insist on letting it go the way it's going to go rather than forcing it. That kind of thing I hold on to zealously. I think that's the essence. You know, don't tamper with that. Don't will it. Don't force it. Let it come through in its own terms.
Tonight, just a little preview, Ann Chwatsky will be speaking about her experience in photographing Lee Krasner. And we will have Lisa DiLberto, who was featured in the book Lee and Me as one of the people who assisted Lee. And we will also have a recorded interview with Gail Levin, which she did today with Helen Harrison. But before we get to that, I know we have people of different levels on the call. Some are beginners, some are, you know, art professionals. So I just want to touch upon some aspects of Lee's life. So Lee was born in 1908 to immigrant Orthodox Jewish parents who escaped Russia because of anti-Semitism. She was raised in Brooklyn. And I think Lee, it's an incredible story. Like, how does this girl from Brooklyn become one of the most important American painters and also one of the most influential people in terms of forming abstract expressionism and being instrumental in Jackson Pollock's career? So her parents expected her to have a traditional upbringing, get married and have children and that sort of thing. But Lee had a different idea. She studied art. And of course, her early works look like this, where they were representational, where she's painting subjects that of herself and other aspects of life that you can observe, and you render that on the canvas. She had a scholarship to Cooper Union in New York City, and she was very active in the art world. And she also studied with the famous teacher Hans Hofmann. And she recalled Hans Hofmann saying, "This is so good, you would not know it was done by a woman." So she did face, of course, as a woman during that era, she faced discrimination, and just even like this, kind of a belittling compliment. And Lee, even though she was brought up in a traditional Orthodox Jewish home, she says she recalled reading a prayer translation and thinking it was indeed a beautiful prayer in every sense except for the closing of it. If you are a male, you say, "Thank you, O Lord, for creating me in your image." And if you are a woman, you say, "Thank you, O Lord, for creating me as you saw fit." So Lee did not follow the traditional Jewish path. She set out on her own. And she was hired by the WPA to create murals and assist with murals. And she did recall that for this government-sponsored program, there was no discrimination against women. And the discrimination came later in the art world, of course, with rising prices, gallery dealers, and also she said when the Surrealists came over, they had more of a discriminatory attitude towards women. But that's a whole other topic. So of course, Lee met Jackson Pollock. They met, she was in an exhibition with Pollock and she had never heard of him. They were in New York City. So she boldly went to his studio and introduced herself. They fell in love, and Lee, of course, took an immediate liking, not just to Pollock, but also to his work. And they decided as a couple that Pollock would be the breadwinner and Lee would support and promote his career. So Lee negotiated with Peggy Guggenheim to get a monthly stipend for Pollock and money, a loan for the down payment on the house so they could move to Springs, East Hampton, Long Island. Lee always continued doing her own art, but she did not promote herself as an artist in the professional sense while Pollock was alive. So today, of course, you can visit the Pollock House, go to pkhouse.org to set up an appointment. And so Lee was painting in the small room upstairs, and sometimes it was so cold, she painted downstairs. And she painted, her work became increasingly abstract, and she painted these little image series that look a little like hieroglyphics. And Lee said, Jackson always treated me as an artist. He always acknowledged, was aware of what I was doing. I was a painter before I knew him, and he knew that. And when we were together, I couldn't have stayed with him one day if he didn't treat me as a painter. So they really played off of each other's creativity. And I think that this painting shows how Lee is starting to open up a little bit in her brushwork, and it becomes a little more expressive, a little looser. And perhaps that was, you know, from being around Pollock. Lee is very well known for her collages, where she boldly would tear up former canvases and then reconfigure them in a brand new way to make a new composition and paint back into them. She says, I have never been able to understand the artist whose image never changes. And here's an example of a work that she did where she cut up Pollock strip painting and then reconfigured it to make these collages, which are really, really huge. And of course, you can't tell that in this slide. They're monumental collages. So after Pollock's death in 1956, Pollock died in a drunk driving accident. He was behind the wheel, and his mistress and her friend were in the car. His mistress, Ruth Kligman, survived. The friend, Edith Metzger, died. Lee was in Paris at the time. She came back, and she didn't paint for a year, but then she did go into the barn studio where Pollock had been painting, and she resumed her creative output. And I think one of my main takeaways from Lee, amongst other things, is the way she expressed her grief and her bereavement. And you could see her moving through what I call the seasons of grief. And she's expressing her inner life with action painting. She's using her whole body. This is a monumental, huge canvas that's at the Whitney Museum of American Art. And this one is so interesting. This was 1 year after Pollock's death, and look how it's so exuberant. And I wonder, and this is just my own personal interpretation, was there maybe a feeling of a bit of a relief, because she did have a lot of responsibility caring for Pollock and his troubles with alcoholism. So Lee went into the studio after her mother's death, and she would paint at night because she had insomnia. And she did these beautiful paintings called the Umber series, because of course at night you can't see light. And I think these are also a remarkable expression of grief, but it's like a bodily expression. It's energy made visible.
Beautiful.
And I love how in her later work, her painting becomes a little more lyrical, and you see often images of nature springing forth. And it shows an incredible resilience to me. Painting is a revelation, an act of love. As a painter, I can't experience it any other way. And here she is making her collage in her studio, where she tore up these drawings that she did in Hans Hofmann's workshop years ago. And then she recreates it to make this mosaic-like collage. That's really bold. I mean, I have work from high school. I don't even want to rip it up or even throw it out. It's still in my basement. So, and here she is towards the end of her life with one of her monumental collages. And, you know, she painted and created art all the way through, even when she had arthritis, even when she was in pain, she managed to make these huge artworks. So there's so many takeaways with Lee in terms of character. And I think each person here, as they share their recollections, there's so many ways, of course, to look at a life, right? And look at a person's personality and their work. And I hope it gives meaning to all the people on this Zoom call, that there's some kind of takeaway, maybe something that each one of us might want to emulate. So with that being said, I'm going to stop my screen share. And I would like to introduce our speaker, Ann Chwatsky, who is a photographer. And Ann, before I show the images, would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
And also your relationship with Lee?
Sure. It was very interesting. I first met her, actually, I was assigned to do a story on artists from the Hamptons, and Lee was the only one who insisted upon being photographed in New York. So I went to her apartment on 72nd Street and photographed her. And I walked in and I thought, oh my God, she looks like a wreck. And I didn't know what to do. But I, by chance, happened to have, amongst my lighting system, I had makeup and a purple shawl. And so I said to her, I can help you get yourself organized. She was literally wearing a navy house dress. And she looked at me, and I thought she's going to throw me and the editor and the writer out. But she didn't. She explained that she was not feeling well, and that it was difficult for her, and she didn't like anybody around to help, that in the house to help her. So I said, well, I think we can come up with something. And we did. And that's the black and white photograph that I particularly like.
Okay, I'm gonna, excuse me, and
Sure.
I'd like to, can I show the photo and you can
Please.
talk while I'm showing it?
Sure, sure. There's my purple shawl in black and white. And, I just said I wanted to make a photograph of her that was as strong as her work was, as how I appreciated her work. So we got along very well. And then that summer there was a show at Guildhall about artists and writers, and I photographed her there amongst other artists. If you could show the color one. Yeah, in front of the painting. And she had my shawl again. And it was a really interesting experience, because then she said, are you out here? And I said, I'm mostly out here. And she said, well, so am I. Why don't you come see me? I said, sure. So we made a date, and I went to the house, and she had invited me for lunch, but it was after about 2 hours, there was no lunch. She eventually took out some potato salad and talked about how she loved reasons. But we did talk a lot, and I said to her, do you want to go out? Do you want to do something another time? So there was the movie, The Diner, that was playing in East Hampton, and I said I would pick her up, and we would go to the movie. And people online kept saying, like, who is Ann with? Is that blah, blah, blah? It was really, it was a fun evening.
Oh,
I
wait,
think she
excuse
enjoyed it.
me. What is that music? Is somebody
Oh,
unmuted?
yeah, I canceled them.
Oh, good. Yeah, everybody mute yourself, please. Thank
Sorry.
you.
So that was basically my experiences with her. And yes, could she be a little gruff? But, if you don't feel well, you're a little gruff. And I admired I admired her experiences, and I admired her work. So basically was my experience with her.
And what did you most admire about Lee?
I think that she was able to persevere through everything. I mean, when I read all the books about her, and I learned, how difficult it was, to be a woman in a man's art world. So that she was accepted but not accepted, and et cetera, and that she just continued and persevered, and made her way. It was very impressive to me.
Mm-hmm. And when you met her, Ann, was there anything that surprised you? Were you like, oh?
It surprised me that she was, that she wanted to have a friend. Yes. And that she was somewhat gracious by inviting me over, things like that. And just that she was pretty plain spoken. I'm sure that there were lots of things I didn't hear about, but she was, and she talked about herself, and she talked about me, talked about life in the Hamptons. She didn't talk a lot about Pollock, which I thought was great.
Mhm.
So that's what I could say.
Anne, thank you so much. I'm just wondering,
you.
does anybody have any questions for Anne? Because Anne has to leave early. So if you have some questions, you can unmute and we'll do it that way. You can just ask a question.
Well, I have a quick question. The beautiful photograph that's on the cover of Ruth Appelhoff's book, with the painting in the background is called Morning Glory that
Yes.
she did for the Artists and Poets exhibition. Did she talk a little bit about her relationship with Howard Moss, who was the poet whose work was included?
All she said was that he was a good friend, had always been a good friend to her. She certainly didn't say anything more personal than that. I think she usually wanted the photographic sessions to be over soon. was the feeling. But here she was relaxed enough to really smile. I love this one too. So
That's so beautiful, Anne. It really
yeah, thank
is.
you. She did not go into much about the poet at all.
Mhm. And that was Helen Harrison, the director of the Pollock-Krasner House, who just asked that question. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question?
I've always been kind of curious and never got an answer, but why are artists such a popular subject to photograph?
Well, that's a really good question. They have to be, because they have to have it in exhibits. They have to have it in magazines, and like one of my photographs was when her retrospective was at the Brooklyn Museum, so they blew it up to like 6 feet tall. It's important for people to know, I think, what the artist looks like, that they can somehow either identify or understand maybe a little bit more. I think that's the only real reason, and they are not averse to publicity or knowing that they might be shown someplace, that their photo might be used.
Mhm. Good question. I'm thinking we might do a session about photographing the artist as a separate Zoom talk. So that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it
And
is.
the way an artist is photographed tells a story about the person. So it's
Yeah.
really, really important. It's for the history of all time, it tells a story. So to me, these photographs, Lee looks very strong in these photographs, but
Yes.
this one is also, you can see there's like a softness in her as well. And of course, the way Pollock was photographed active in his barn painting, those are iconic photographs. So these are really important when we talk about photographing artists.
Yes.
Any
Yes.
other questions? Anne, thank you so much for sharing your firsthand account.
Thank you. I
And
look forward to seeing the whole video. Thank you.
excellent. So let's see. Next, I'm going to show a video presentation of Gail Levin speaking to Helen Harrison just today, but Gail couldn't make it tonight, so we did this video instead.
Welcome, Gail Levin, the biographer of Lee Krasner. Here is her marvelous book, which came out in 2011. She was very friendly with Lee and very close to her. And so I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about her recollections of Lee.
So when I met Lee, I was just 22, and I wrote to her a letter to her via her gallery and asked if I could have an interview. And I was happily rewarded with a letter back from the gallery, which set up an interview. And I taped it, and it was an edited version of it, a slightly shorter version, was published in 2019 in the Barbican catalog, exhibition catalog of her retrospective held in London that year. Maybe because I was so young when I met Lee Krasner, and she was pretty much 2 generations older than me, my relationship, for me, seemed, and I think for her too, I was kind of almost like a grandchild, or at least she was nurturing in the way that she could be nurturing, which I don't think that many people got to see that aspect of her, at least not the ones that wrote. And I would like to, in that sense, point out that many people got to know her or interact with her late in her life when she died, she was only 75, but she was suffering from several chronic autoimmune diseases, which really messes up your feelings toward the world because you're in a lot of chronic pain. And I think a lot of the younger people that encountered her had no idea, you know, maybe she seemed like she was going to bite off their head, but I don't think they grasped what she was going through. So she had rheumatoid arthritis and she had colitis that might have been Crohn's disease. Those are inherited autoimmune diseases. And for example, she went to a lot of folk remedies. She tended to believe in those, as I guess a lot of people did of her generation. So she, for example, for the rheumatoid arthritis, I remember she wore these copper bangle bracelets, and that copper is supposed to be absorbed into your system. Well, I don't really think it's considered a workable remedy for pain. So I'm just saying that I think she's a little bit misunderstood. And that's one of the reasons I did want to write the biography.
Did you learn anything from your research that wasn't apparent to you when you were familiar with Lee in person?
Well, I learned a lot more about her first lover and the 10-year-long relationship she had with Igor Panchov. And I learned something about Lee's character, that even though she rejected Panchov in the end for Pollock, because Panchov came back to her after he left her and wanted to get her back, she bore no resentment toward him. And actually, after Pollock's death and she had money, she helped take care of Igor when he was, you know, impoverished and had all these medical and dental problems. She pitched in right eagerly. Not that she wanted him back, she certainly didn't, but he was an old and dear person in her life, and she reached out to him. And this charitable aspect of Lee, I think, is reflected in her leaving her estate to a foundation, to the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, which really does more than she wanted it to, but she was interested in taking care of needy, financially needy artists, not so much in recognition and awards, but helping those who were struggling, because she sure had struggled.
Right.
And that was part of what broke up Igor and Lee. So I learned a lot more about that. And I think reading her correspondence with her old boyfriend, what is his name, George? Do I have the
George
name?
Mercer.
Yeah, George Mercer. Also taught me more about her character than she would have revealed. But I didn't really learn anything that changed my the impression I got from knowing her. And for example, sometimes she was very abrupt with me, but that was an aspect of personality that I was not unfamiliar with, and especially in an older person who was chronic illness. So I had my own doting grandmother. But Lee, for example, went out of her way to teach me how to cook, sometimes how to use leftovers. She was extremely frugal. So, I mean, she had all that money and she was saving it for the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, but she used leftovers. She did her own cooking. She was definitely very frugal. And at the same time, she was very set in her ways. That's another thing that might have put people off. But that happens to old people, especially when they live alone for so many years, as she did after Pollock's death. Um, uh, Lee also was a kind of mentor figure to me in the art world. I mean, she could see right through pretense and she could cut it with a knife, and it was very witty. So the way she would characterize people, and I would sometimes be really baffled, and she would sort of clue me into what was going on. It was eye-opening. And well, I got to do things with her, like go to Thanksgiving. I spent one Thanksgiving with her out in East Hampton, and we were the guest of Edward Albee. His mother was there, and Howard Moss, the poet. And those are very special experiences that she shared with me. And I also used to have her for dinner a lot at my apartment in New York, and often with an artist friend, like my friend Naoto Nakagawa remembers coming to dinner with Lee. And she was always open to meeting younger artists and maybe passing on some of her cynical wisdom about the art world.
I think she had a fairly jaded view of the art world.
Well, with very good reason.
Mhm.
And I'm very interested to see, there's a biography coming out of Harold Rosenberg. I
Mhm.
mean, the critics, Harold Rosenberg and Clement Greenberg, never gave Krasner her due. She was always Mrs. Pollock. And I mean, she lived through the era of sexism, and yet she was unable to embrace really the beginnings of feminist art. She was really, wanted to be part of the art world where men dominated, but she wanted to be accepted as an equal.
Where there wasn't a question of whether you were male or female, but just whether your art was worthy or not.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So, but I will say this also, that I never doubted that Lee considered Jackson Pollock a genius,
Mhm.
not herself, and that she considered herself inspired by Pollock.
Mhm.
So I don't think she competed with him in any way.
Mhm.
She tried to support him.
Right.
He was as you know, Helen, a really tough cookie to deal with.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Gail. This has really been a wonderful reminiscence, and we're very happy that you were willing to share it with us.
Thank you for having me. And a happy birthday to Lee Krasner,
Yeah.
and may her memory last a long time.
Thank you again.
And thank you to Helen Harrison for conducting that interview. And to Gail Levin for coming on today to speak about Lee. So next up, we have a special guest speaker who Lisa Dilberty and Dilberto. And Lisa is going to share her experience as, I'm not sure what your official, a helper to Lee Krasner. So Lisa, will you tell us a little bit about the book and also what your relationship was with Lee?
Sure. So this is the book that Ruth Appelhoff wrote, Lee and Me, an intimate portrait of Lee Krasner. And in this book, she compiles interviews and all this information about Lee throughout her life and her career. And it's really, it really truly is a very intimate capture of Lee. And when I met her, I was 19 years old, and it was 1979. I was in college, and Lee was 71, and I was hired to be a companion because her personal assistant was not able to be with her that summer. So I met with her in Manhattan in her apartment, and she made it very clear what my role was going to be with her. You know, I was there to assist her on a daily basis, to drive her wherever she needed to go. And not to be in the studio at all. So she did give me the shed that was on the property as my own studio to use in any way that I wanted to. And we went out together, and oftentimes we would get rides from people, and the car was either there at the house or not. I did a lot of like physical work with her, also, you know, taking things out of storage. It was really her real day-to-day. She needed somebody there. As everybody has cited, she was in pain, and I didn't know, I was not aware of any of her health issues at all, but she was extremely independent, and she never wanted to talk about art, but she would talk about other things. We had really nice conversations. And you know, there were moments where I was indirectly entertaining her as a city kid, coming there and helping her out, getting used to the environment there with her. But you know, she did talk about being alone, and that society doesn't really honor that in people. So it's really good. It's a really good experience to live alone and to you know, understand how you are, how you fit into the world on a daily basis. We really did not talk about art, but I was invited to the dinners outside of the house because I had to drive her, and she was always very gracious about explaining to me what was going on in the conversations. We would go, you know, I kept a daily journal of my time with Lee, and in there, I you know, I learned a lot about who she was with, what they were doing, and then when they would come to the house, I would be banished to my room because she just didn't want me there. But I would go into the library during the day. I had my bicycle. I would go out while she was in the studio. She said, you know, she wanted her privacy, so I was not really allowed to even be around on the grounds. So I did have a lot of time to myself. And through that time, I learned a lot about her. And to tie my experience with Lee to the book that Ruth wrote, really helped me understand her as a person and as an artist even more, and why she might have been the way that she was. You know, more her gruffness, as Anne had pointed out, was really like I felt like a protective mechanism for her, as everybody is saying. It was like really her independence, her wanting to be an artist in her own right, not following in the shadow of Pollock. All of that was like very, very important and to her. And she made that, you know, she made that quite clear. And so, yeah, it was, you know, I worked with her every day, driving her to the store, doing daily routines, regular day-to-day work with her. But at the same time, she really was very, she would be gruff, and then she would be like a sweetheart. And, you know, I learned about her homeopathy box. She had this box made of shells. I asked her what it was. So it was obviously the things that Gail was just talking about, having alternative methods of taking care of herself. So there were many things. And in the book that Ruth wrote, she talked about a trip that she and Donald McKinney took down to Alabama, and Donald McKinney was apparently the director of the Marlborough Gallery. And she came upon a place called G's Bend Quilts, and they both wanted to support them. And they were African-American women who were making these very beautiful quilts. And so she wanted to continue to support them in some way so that they could continue to do the work that they were doing. And there was a lot of that I learned about her, where she had like a prickly exterior, but on the inside she was kind of squishy. And I thought that that was a really great part of who she was. When she would let go that way, I could see that I was kind of starting to fall in love with her in a way that you would with a grandparent or something like that, because our roles were very defined. And, you know, and in the end, she would be very nitpicking with me as well. I irritated her for the things that I didn't do that she wanted me to do or expected me to do. And so we did wind up parting ways in the very end, not being able to work with her anymore, because that just started to get in the way of our day-to-day. And we agreed, we reminded each other that we both agreed that we were going to try and live together. And it just didn't work out in the end, but we left on a very good, you know, on very good terms. So
Lisa, can I ask you something? I don't know
Yeah.
if it's about Lee, but well, first off, how'd you get the job?
so my father was a photographer, and he was taking photographs at the gallery where Darby was working. And so Darby was Lee's personal assistant. I believe she met her in 1976. And so she was looking for a college student to help her. And that's how I got the job.
And my other question is, how did, like, were you intimidated at all? Like, I would be intimidated if I was 19 and like someone said, go take care of or help out with Jackson Pollock's. This is how I would think about it as a 19-year-old. Go help out with Jackson Pollock's wife, Lee Krasner. I would be so shy and intimidated. How did you feel?
I wasn't. For me, it was like a dream come true, because I could be in the presence of greatness. You know, it was, I would be in the presence of that time period of art. And I remember during our interview in Manhattan, she said to me, you know, a lot of my friends are old. And I thought to myself, yes, but look at who your friends are, you know, and it's like, that's okay. I don't mind being around. I don't consider you old, you know, because it was just really, I was not intimidated at all.
I'm impressed.
It was a great opportunity.
Oh, that's so good. I could just imagine.
Yeah.
So does anybody have any questions for Lisa? You can put them actually in the chat. I will read them.
This is Gary Adamek. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Gary. Where are you coming in from?
I'm calling in from just around the corner at 252 Old Stone Highway. I am Ruth Appelhoff's husband, and I just wanted to thank Lisa for the interview and the other interviewees, and also Helen, of course, and yourself, Joyce. But much help in the book, and I couldn't get off mute when Ann was on, and I can tell you this, and I wanted to tell Ann and Helen, maybe you can give me her contact email, but when Ruth was able to use Ann's picture of Lee, she was so ecstatic. It was unbelievable. You know, she had heard the story and all those wonderful things. And when she got the picture and she talked about the scarf, how she did the makeup and all that kind of, and she was able to use that. I do want to thank Ann again, even I'm sure Ruth thanked her very often. And then the other thing is, Ruth did comment, you know, she was a little older than you when she was working at 34, and she was doing her master's on her. So she was interviewing and doing those kinds of things, but she did have the same relationship. It was hard knocks. So you were right on that. But thank you very much. And I appreciate Joyce and Helen very much for putting this on. This series has been great. And by the way, Lee Ann Appelhoff, her daughter, is on the line.
Yeah, I was going to give her a shout out. We see Lee up there. Hi there. How are you?
And what would you like to say a few words in about your mom or Lee or any hellos?
Hi, my name is Lee. I'm Ruth's daughter. Yes, we're very proud of her book. And I just want to say, I'm not at all prepared to speak, but the book was something that she had wanted to write for years and years. And it was always in a box in the closet or in the basement. And wherever she moved as a kid, these boxes followed her along. So it wasn't until she retired from Guildhall that she had the opportunity to finally put pen to paper. And I have to tell you, the stories that she shared in the book are just so heartwarming. I know that when I was a kid, I think I was 10 years old when she was there with Lee for the summer. And she would write me letters, upstairs in the bedroom late at night and telling me how difficult it was, but how much she loved being there and what an opportunity it was. So this was really a dream come true. So thank you all very much for your participation and support of her and in this book.
Leanne, thank you so much. And
welcome.
of course, the book is available for sale at the usual venues. And of course, you can get it through any library system as well. And there it is. Excellent. The book comes alive with the speakers. So, and really seriously, thank you so much for jumping in there. And this is informal. So is there anybody else who has a question for Lisa or anyone else on this birthday
I have
party?
a question for Lisa. Are you an artist yourself?
I am.
You are. And what is your art like? Was Lee an inspiration to you artistically as well?
She wasn't, but when I learned that she had repurposed her work into collage, I had already been doing collage in like my freshman year in college. I hadn't done it prior to that. So in the library, I had actually found a book that she was included in, 12 women artists of collage. And so I had read that while I was staying with Lee. But I really did love her. I did love her collages. I thought they were very beautiful, and the paintings that were very similar to that. But she did not have an influence on me. But I did admire it.
And Lisa, what art was in the house when you were living there?
There was a lot of her paintings hanging up. There was one very small Pollock painting that was hanging up, and then there were other artists' work that was in the house. And we never talked about art either. She didn't want to. She made it quite clear that she wasn't interested, which was fine.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I could see why.
Yes.
All right, I have a question about, and if you don't want to answer this, it's fine. Did she let you use the shower?
I don't have a recollection about that. I don't have a recollection about that at all.
The reason I ask is because Ruth mentioned that she wasn't allowed to use the water because people who had been there before her had drained the well. And so she had to go down and take a bath at Louse Point in her bathing suit. Mm-hmm. And so Lee had some peculiar ideas about her house guests. I just wondered if that impacted you as well, because the little shed where you stayed does not have any plumbing.
Right. So I stayed there during the day to do my own artwork, but I stayed upstairs in the second floor bedroom opposite her bedroom, which is now the office.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there, especially at night.
You're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you.
Where do you live now, Lisa?
I live in Queens.
Oh, okay. Well, love to see you in person, right, Helen?
Yes.
Really, come on, let us know when you're in the area.
I will. I have a lot of friends out there, so I will certainly do that. Thank you.
Any other questions about anything from anybody? Any comments? Anybody who knew Lee who would like to pop in? This is not a formal lecture, so anyone who would like to share any thoughts?
Well,
Is there
I could say,
sorry.
So my grandmother lived across the street from Lee, practically across the street. And they were friends, and she wasn't an artist. She was just a housewife, but they had a really lovely relationship. You know, it was just very ordinary and simple. And I just remember going over there, and I don't even remember what she ever talked about, but she was very sweet on a casual level like that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think the same could be said of Pollock in terms of his relationships with the locals, that, you know, they were just kind of ordinary conversations, you know, at the spring store and that kind of thing. Yeah. Anybody else?
Bernice here. I remember it may have been a Gray Art Gallery. It could have been 30 years ago. There was a show and there was a film about Lee Krasner. And I remember she was at the beauty salon, the beauty parlor. And somebody said, "You mean to say you get your hair done?" And she said, "What do you mean? Just because I'm an artist, I shouldn't look good?" I mean, I love that part of her. I'll never forget that. It was wonderful.
That film was made by Barbara Rose.
Is
And
that right?
It's called Lee Krasner, The Long View. And it was made
Ah.
for the exhibition of the Collages at the Pace Gallery in 1977, for which you saw her at work in those wonderful photographs by Ray Eames. And
Yes.
Barbara Rose had a very close relationship with Lee. And unfortunately, Barbara passed away a couple of years ago, but she was one of the champions who really helped to bring her more into the public eye, not as Mrs. Jackson Pollock, but as an artist in her own right, and
Right.
someone who deserved to be grouped with the pioneers of abstract expressionism. And that film, unfortunately, is no longer really widely available, although we do have an archival copy at the Pollock-Krasner house. But it is the only film of her actually physically working as an artist.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I have to say that I knew her very slightly. I didn't really know her well at all. But in 1982, when she did the exhibition, the Guildhall Artists and Poets exhibition, and she painted that Morning Glory painting, I did a video of some of the artists and poets talking about collaborating. And we were supposed to film Lee in the studio. But when we got there, or no, I think maybe Darby or someone called us and said she couldn't do it because she was not having a good day. And so we never did. And I really felt very bad that we didn't capture that on film, although she did talk about it in a couple of other videos. But one of the important things for me as a researcher and someone who is trying to perpetuate her legacy, she was very voluble. She gave many interviews. She was not hesitant about talking about her work, her life, her motivations, her impulses, her background, working on the WPA and being ostracized later on. You know, all the complexities of her life, which was a very complex one. And so I always regretted that we were never able to get in and actually talk to her, or at least I couldn't personally.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
If I could jump in just to say thank you all. And I think this has been a beautiful celebration of Lee's birthday. And it's great to see you again, Lisa, after all these years.
Hi,
It's wonderful.
good to see you.
Yeah, and it's just beautiful to hear all of these reminiscences of Lee. And I think what the interview you had with Gail Levin was just wonderful.
How
And
long were you her assistant, Darby?
Pardon?
How long were you, did you work for Lee?
I worked with her for 9 years. And I would say everything that Gail said, that I think not enough people understood or knew how funny she was, how warm she was. yeah, as everyone has been saying, she had a gruff exterior at times, but I am continually inspired, and I work now with graduate students, and I'm constantly quoting Lee. And it was just a life-changing time in my life. And it continues to inspire me.
And we also should not forget that in her will, she not only made provision to preserve the Pollock-Krasner house, not as a monument to her or even a monument to Pollock, but as a living place where people could come to appreciate the art and the artists of the area, but that she established the Pollock-Krasner Foundation with her fortune to be able
Right.
to give back to artists so that they could buy some time.
Yep.
Time is the most precious thing. And so many artists have to work at other jobs in order to sustain themselves. And this gives them the chance to do work just for themselves, out of the generosity. After all, she grew up as an artist on the WPA.
Right.
She was paid the same as the men. She wound up being a supervisor. She actually supervised Pollock. He worked, so to speak, under her. And there was a kind of equality in at least you were on the same playing field. Whether or not your art measured up was another issue. But that she had that background, and the artists, the female artists who came up at that time, were deeply embittered by the fact that the marketplace excluded them, whereas they had parity. And it really was, something that she never forgot. And so for her legacy to help artists have parity and have that opportunity to buy time to do their work is a wonderful thing. And we should be eternally grateful to her for having created that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wrote a letter of recommendation a few months ago for an artist in his 70s who has struggled so many years as Lee did, and I am so grateful all the time for what Lee did and how she left that foundation to support artists. It's remarkable. It's gorgeous.
The endowment is still alive and active right now as we speak.
It's just PKF as in Frank, Pollock-Krasner Foundation, pkf.org. And
Right.
all the information about grant applications, which are now all done electronically, is available on that website.
Yeah.
And they give grants all over the world.
Yeah.
Well, we do need to end, but I'll tell you what, for anyone who has not been to the Pollock-Krasner house and wants to get a little preview, before going there in person, if you do ever get a chance, I'll show the recorded video of the barn studio, but I know some people are going to have to leave. So before we get to that, I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers. And I would like to first thank Helen Harrison for conducting the interview with Gail Levin. And I'd like to thank Gail Levin for jumping in at the last minute and sharing. And Ann Chwatsky for coming on live. And Lisa DiLberto for coming on live. And Darby
Kardansky.
Thank you for popping in at the last minute, and all the other wonderful people who shared. And I just want to say one thing which occurred to me during this. This is just my own takeaway. There are some people in life who are like touchy-feely and give hugs and are funny and, that kind of thing. And then there are other people who come across like maybe a little more stoic, but they do have this deep sense of compassion. And I think kindness is expressed in different ways. And I do think Lee's legacy shows her kindness. So that's that. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to screen share and I will show the studio barn. It's an 8-minute video. And of course, I understand if some of you need to leave, but let's all give our speakers a happy birthday round of applause.
Thank you, Joyce.
Nice to see everybody as usual. Okay, good. So now I'm going to do a little screen share. And let me just pull this up. And this was taken about a few months ago. I have a winter coat on, so it must have been the winter. I hope that this encourages you to look into more of Lee Krasner's paintings, because of course, those are just a few of examples of these different aspects. Okay, so here I am in the first part of this barn, where this part was used for storage. Now, Lee was painting in the room upstairs until that one that I showed you, The Season. She claimed this studio as her own after his death. She died in 1984. In 1987, this was opened and restored as a museum. And today, many of her belongings are here. So, well, this over here, of course, these are painting racks. And over here, we have Lee Krasner's cart. You see her painting cart there? And her painting boots. Now, Lee and Pollock did not paint in here together. Over here, we have her pigments that you can mix with oil to make paint, glass mosaic pieces. Also, following Pollock's death, she was commissioned to do 2 murals. One of them was in New York City. I forget where the other one was. So she was very productive. When you come in here, which I hope you come to visit, you can go to pkhouse.org to sign up for an in-person tour. It's very intimate. So here we have Lee Krasner's painting smock. And right now I have these little foam slippers on my feet, which we will give you so you can walk right into the barn. So the floor reveals Pollock's drip painting technique where he laid his paintings. And this floor was covered with boards when they were both alive at a certain point. And so after they both died, which is shown in this photo, the museum conservators came in and took off the boards, peeled off the paper to reveal Jackson Pollock's floor. And that's why you don't see Lee's marks on this floor. We also have historic photos on the wall. And we're not going to go too in depth today. You can come back for like more of a standard tour where I go more in depth and we'll go into the house. But here's a picture of Lee Krasner. She was born in the US in Brooklyn. Her parents were Russian immigrants. They fled Russia because of anti-Semitism, and they owned a store. And Lee was they were Jewish Orthodox family. They spoke Yiddish. She was expected to have a traditional role as a wife and mother, but she took her own path. She studied art at Cooper Union in New York City, and she was very active in the art world in the 1940s in New York City. She was in an exhibit with Jackson Pollock. She had never heard of this guy, so she went over to his studio, which was also his apartment, and knocked on his door, and the rest was history, as they say. She fell in love, they fell in love, and she immediately took a liking to Pollock, but also she really believed in his genius as an artist. And I do understand that idea that when you believe in someone's genius, you can support them in a way that you don't feel resentful about it or anything, because you just believe in that person's genius. So they moved here in 1945, and in 1946, they bought the house in the Springs, East Hampton, Long Island. If it stops raining, I'll go out there. They did not have children. Pollock, I was told, wanted children. Lee did not. They had 2 dogs. And they also had pet crows. Pollock apparently was good with these crows. They would come and sit in his hand, and here he is with one of his pet crows. Pollock was born in Cody, Wyoming in 1912 in a very low-income family. And together, you might say this couple is the epitome of the American dream, right? rising to a middle-class existence with land, a house, a car, and also Pollock, very successful and famous. 1945, is he the greatest living painter in the United States? I mean, yeah, 1949. Okay. And he's in the studio painting. He's the breadwinner, so to speak. They're living off of his art. And as I said, he relapses into alcoholism. Pollock did not paint while he was drunk. The drinking brought him down in every way. In fact, the last year of his life, he was hardly even painting. He became so depressed. So this is as much a story of art, bereavement, as it is alcoholism, and how devastating alcoholism is to families. So, as I said, Lee went to Paris, and when she returned, she used this studio for her own. Now, this is a picture of Pollock painting his famous drip painting technique, and I'm not going to go in depth for the sake of this tour. These are the buckets of paint that were left behind. He used house paint and basters to squirt paint and sticks to drip paint, unconventional materials. Non-art materials, for that matter. And here's a beautiful picture of Lee, 1962 in the studio. You can see she did not paint on the floor. She tacked her paintings to the wall. The material actually is Homosote. It's really good for a studio. It's very easy to tack things up. And it's fun to come in here. You see way up there, you can see where her drips and splatters landed, way up high. Now, once in a while, she used a ladder, but she preferred to use her own body. And here you could see, that's what I mean when I say she's in a dance. It's a rhythmic movement that's being relayed on the painting. It's action painting, okay? And she lived here on her own until she was an older woman. And she also had an apartment in New York City. And she spent the rest of her life painting. And she became very successful by the end of her life. And today her paintings sell for millions of dollars. Now, at that time, it was harder for women to have complete recognition. Okay. So we're going to end on that note. And I want to thank everyone for coming again. And nice meeting everyone also. And I hope that you get to come by the Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner house, pkhouse.org, and have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are. So
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you. Bye-bye.